where we would have rain,
Okay,
where
Father.
we would have rain, drizzle, and fog. So I'm very happy to be here. I want to give a bigger context of where my mind and heart is, and I'm sure that you will appreciate the bigger picture of where we are. This weekend, we approach the great solemnity of the Ascension, and our thoughts and prayers are rising with Christ himself as he returns to God the Father. Next weekend, we celebrate the solemnity of Pentecost, the birthday of the church. We move into Trinity Sunday, an opportunity for us to reflect on our own relationships as we appreciate the relationship of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in the great mystery of Trinity. Immediately following that, we move into the last mountaintop moment, Corpus Christi, before we launch into the summer season. So these four mountaintop experiences before us to remind us once again about mountaintop moments and about sacred moments and sacred space in our own faith. I'm very conscious, as are you undoubtedly, of our Holy Father coming to Canada. I'm very conscious of his health and well-being and the demands placed upon him and how he is called to be life-giving. And perhaps the most life-giving way that he can come to our great country is by a listening stance. And so we're also conscious of his mandate to engage in the process of looking at synodality. And at the heart of that, of course, is a listening stance before one another. Along with you, my heart is broken over the tragedy of what has happened in Texas. And of course, we continue to carry the Ukraine. So these are all realities that are before us and that I believe prompt every one of us to listen more, to speak less as we contemplate tragedy, as we contemplate mountaintop moments of our faith. As I looked at the work that was available to me in this particular book, I thought to myself that maybe the most helpful way to approach this particular talk will be certainly to speak about life, but then the bigger question and the bigger challenge for all of us is to ask of ourselves, how are we life-giving? That's how we make this real to ourselves wherever we come from in the country. And so the question becomes, how are we life-giving to one another? So there are certain words that I use consistently, and the people in Grande Prairies will tell you this. And so in our time together, as short as it is, you're going to hear me reference these particular words. And what I did, interestingly enough, you can find anything on the computer. You wrote down a list of words that I wanted to reference, and then I came up with a word search. And so we're going to send that out to you so that you will know the major points, the major words that I have referenced in this particular presentation. So some of the things that I'd like to just touch upon, and we can touch upon everything, the notion of a seamless garment. A particular part of our Catholic faith is our belief in the promotion and the dignity of life from its natural beginning until its natural end, a seamless garment. The question becoming for us at all times, how are we life-giving? The listening stance before other people. How do we validate them? Our Holy Father speaks about encounters with grace, standing in truth, the necessity of gratitude above all else. I'd like to reference the biblical passage, the woman at the well. It's an all-time favorite for me because it's there that I believe we find Jesus in one of his most life-giving moments with a woman. It is the longest conversation that we know of that Jesus had with anyone in the Bible. So it is worthy of our reflection. The notion of holy ground as we stand before one another. Our Holy Father Francis speaks about encounter, sacred space, affirmation, the grace of letting go of our own agendas so as to make room for real hospitality in welcoming other people, and in doing so, being life-giving to them. Ultimately, we are walking each other home, and we are called to be a people of hope. And the most that we can do with the complexities of the world and the complexities of our church is to hear and hold what other people have to say. Every encounter is undoubtedly a burning bush where we encounter the Lord and where we are asked to be life-giving to other people. I want to tell you a story about a number of years ago. I had the opportunity to go to Anaheim, California. It's the Religious Education Congress. There were 40,000 people there. On a Saturday afternoon, they provided the opportunity for people to go to celebrate the Sacrament of Reconciliation. As you can well imagine, with 40,000 people, there were confessions offered in multiple languages, and certainly Spanish and Vietnamese, English and French were among the top languages used. I got in the lineup to go to celebrate the Sacrament of Reconciliation. And as I stood in that lineup, I thought to myself, maybe Leo, you might be better served by offering yourself as a priest to celebrate the Sacrament of Reconciliation with other people. And then I thought to myself, no, the better place for you, my friend, is to go to confession yourself. It's always a struggle, to be honest, to go to confession. Not a struggle to celebrate the sacrament with other people, but for me to be humble enough and to be honest enough to go to somebody else and to be vulnerable. I was nervous and anxious as to what I would say, and if I'd be really honest. Well, I hauled back the curtain, and there was an Irish priest there with a beautiful, beautiful green cardigan on. And his whole body language, his gesture, his facial expression just radiated to me a life-giving stance. I had the opportunity to unburden myself, and I walked away from that experience feeling like $1 million. I mention that because one of the most life-giving and life-affirming moments in priesthood for me is to celebrate the Sacrament of Reconciliation. And I know that for me to go more often myself as a penitent is something I need to do. To actively listen to other people and to allow others to speak the truth of their own lives before God is a very sacred encounter. And personally, I can't think of anything in my own priesthood that is more life-giving and life-affirming to other people. Some of the greatest grace comes when people can connect the dots of their own gospel story, whatever that is, And then they can see a greater picture of coming before the hand of God and knowing of God's peace and presence. I remember sitting on the beach with a man who had terminal cancer. And he spoke his truth before God and that ocean. And all that I ever had to do was to listen and to appreciate how both of us were very much on holy ground. And if you don't remember anything else of what I've said, I really want to just hone in on the whole notion of listening, because when we listen, we can be a sanctuary for a wandering soul and spirit. When we truly listen to other people, that is hard work. And yet that's what we're challenged to do. To come now to the great encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. The Samaritan woman at the well was having one of those god-awful days. As a matter of fact, her life was a string of god-awful days, and we've all had those. She had struck out in love, and she was married 5 times. And the man that she was living with at the present time was not her husband. And I suspect that deep down inside, that her heart, her broken heart, was just like yours and mine, looking for love and commitment. She unfortunately went looking for love in too many of the wrong places. She was a Samaritan woman, and Jews and Samaritans, as you well know, they don't jive. They were rejected and cast down and looked down upon as being outside the circle of the chosen. She was an outsider on every level. Not only was she shunned because she was a Samaritan, but she suffered an even deeper cut, one that cuts closer to the bone. She was rejected and cast aside by her own people because of her past. And if we're honest, maybe at times we can do that to other people, and we are less than life-giving and life-affirming. She went to Jacob's well at night. She went at all right, but she traveled alone. She was in the heat of the noonday sun. Others would have gone at an earlier hour when the heat was not as oppressive. But she was oppressed by the Jews. She was oppressed by her past. She was oppressed by the heat. She was oppressed by her own feelings of unworthiness. The Samaritan woman thirsted, but her thirst for water wasn't as strong as her thirst for things that were life-giving, life-affirming, for simple acceptance, for understanding, a thirst for somewhere to belong. And that, my friends, rings true in my own life, and I have no doubt that it rings true in yours. COVID has played mental anguish with every one of us. And so today, to speak about life and life-giving approaches to other people and the world around us is so important. You and I could walk into this great story at any moment. In reality, it isn't all that far removed from our own lives, because there are times when we can shun, when we can block other people. Sometimes we can shun people within our own homes, and we can shut down, and we are far from life-giving. We can shut down people at work, at church, or in a staff room, and we're all capable of the silent treatment and the cold shoulder that undoubtedly the woman at the well experienced, and we can do that to other people. Along comes Jesus and his life-giving, life-affirming approach to this woman and to every one of us. He walks into the picture and he sits down by the well. And as I mentioned before, in the single longest recorded conversation that we have of Jesus with anyone in the scriptures, what does he do for her? He validates that woman. My friends, to validate other people does not mean that we agree with everything they say, but it does mean that we hear and hold their truth, whatever it may be. And that is a very important, life-giving, affirming thing that we can do for other people. We live in a world where everybody wants to give you their opinion, when in fact, what most of us really need is we need somebody to listen. Father Richard Rohr says that the vast majority of things in our own experience and in the world around us cannot be fixed, but it must be named. And so for us to create a safe, sacred place of trust and acceptance where other people are accepted, affirmed, and validated is to do what Jesus did to that woman at the well. He didn't fix her problems. She had to face her own future. But he did listen to her, and in doing so, he validated her. And that validation is the single most important thing that we can do to affirm other people. You and I both know that the problems in the church and in the world around us and in our own families, the vast majority of them can't be fixed. But we can hear and hold and validate, and in doing so, we can be life-giving and life-affirming. Time and attention is the single most expensive and life-giving thing that we will ever spend. Because time, once it's spent, it is gone for all eternity. And if we can give other people our time and our attention, well, then we are following the gospel mandate to validate and to love and to accept other people. It is because this woman was recognized, accepted, and affirmed in the here and now that she felt secure enough to open up her own heart and her life to this Jewish man named Jesus. Jesus lifted up her burden in the midst of the noonday sun. He freely gives her a welcome, a sense of belonging, a sense of dignity and self-worth. And that's a rare, rare feeling in today's world. Let's stop for a moment. Here are some questions that I would like you to take into your own prayer. Under the umbrella of life and a life-giving approach to other people, we might ask of ourselves, how do we validate other people? Who validates you? Imagine if you have a problem, if you have a hurt, down where the spirit meets the bone. Who are you going to call to find validation? The cornerstone of that phone call is a listening stance with somebody else. And the people in Grande Prairies have heard this time and time again. It's a mantra in my life, and maybe it's because it's the thing that I want to work on most as a priest. Do I speak in such a way so that others love to listen? Do I listen in such a way that others love to speak. For me, that's the heart of the gospel, and that's the heart of this particular rollo on life and a life-giving stance before other people. Jesus tells her about living waters. He tells her about hope, about promise, and a better tomorrow. And that's exactly what I need to hear in my own life. As a priest, as a white Roman Catholic educated priest today, there's a bullseye on my chest. And so what I need is more references to hope, to promise, to better tomorrows, to validation, and to a listening stance, all life-giving realities. We are thirsting, the whole human race is thirsting. We're thirsting for truth and justice and a sense of fair play. And the families of those children in Texas undoubtedly are thirsting for a sense of justice. In a society that sometimes rallies against prayer, commitment, and spirituality, we are all left wanting a better sense of what's right and wrong. We can be parched for a connection with something and someone bigger than ourselves. The living water that Jesus offers at Jacob's well is offered to every one of us in our own baptism. And it's at our own baptism when we are reminded about a central truth about life itself, that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and that other people carry that same badge, married. They are formed, created in the image and likeness of God. Our first acceptance of God's unconditional love poured over us. Jesus uses water at key moments, and certainly we are reminded of our own baptismal commitment to do what he did to the woman at the well. Let's take a moment. Let's take 5 minutes. And I'm going to ask you to go back to an image of the woman at the well. Go back to that central notion of validation. Who validates us, and how might we validate other people? We're going to take a 5-minute pause. I'm going to ask that we not check cell phones and that we stay focused on the questions that I've posed about validation and a life-affirming stance before other people. There's a story told about an old man. He was a grandfather to a multitude of children and to great-grandchildren, and he was stone deaf. And he went to the doctor to see if there was anything that could be done about his condition. And so the doctor fit him with the very best hearing aids that were available. And so he could hear like he was brand new. And he went back to the doctor about a month later for a monthly checkup. And the doctor said, "My God, your hearing it's close to perfect. This is amazing. It's a miracle in modern day world. You must be really pleased that you can hear again." And the grandfather said, "Well, I haven't told my family yet. I just sit around and listen to them talk. And so far, I've already changed my wheel about 3 times. What is one thing that you want to hear? I want to hear less of other people talking, and I'd like to hear and see more of their time and their attention. To listen more and to speak less." Have you ever been a part of a conversation and you suddenly come to realize that the other person may be hearing you, but they certainly weren't listening. Perhaps there have been times when we have been the ones who were not listening. Listening validates the other person, and that's a priceless, life-giving and life-affirming experience. A listening ear can be a sanctuary for a troubled soul. I ask you honestly, has anybody ever said to you, you're a good listener? Because that, for me, is a compliment written in pure gold. I can't fix problems. I can't do it. Only God alone can do that. But I can cooperate with the man who went to the woman at the well by doing as he did and be life-giving and life-affirming and listening. Listening to ourselves is also a part of the healing story. All of us live very busy lives with schedules and lists and to-do lists and bucket lists. Are we able to reflect on our own lived experience, find the hand of God, and affirm life itself in our own lives and affirm the presence of God? Hopefully at some part of every day, to sit back and to see the hand of God in our own relationships and in our own lives. Listening to find the presence of God within, and then to carry that presence forward in the way that we treat other people. Now that's life. I believe that we all want to be more like Jesus. And good listening brings healing. And to hear and hold is to be diamond. And Jesus was and is the ultimate listener. And I can tell you honestly, in days and in moments, in periods when I've had my own dark night of the soul, he has listened very well to me and been life-affirming. Here are some simple takeaways for all of us, because I believe that we all want to be more life-affirming. We want to listen so as to learn, not just to be polite. Let us listen to other people and the world around us so that we may learn something new. If we ever finish a conversation without learning something new, something surprising, well, then maybe we weren't really listening. And when we talk, we're only affirming what we already know. To quiet our own agenda. While you can't control somebody else's listening habits, you can control your own. And that involves quieting your own mind. And this is so much more than just good manners, because this is affirming basic human dignity and that we are made in the image and likeness of God. And when we stand in the presence of other people, there is a burning bush right there before us, and God is speaking through that person. It is holy ground. It is a sacred encounter. And we can evangelize best, perhaps, by not saying anything at all. And we can lead best, not by our opinion, but by our example. To ask more questions in our conversation. One of the simplest ways to be a better listener is to ask more questions than you give answers. And when you ask questions, You create a safe place for other people to give an untarnished truth, to let them speak in the truth of their own lives. They say that listening is very hard work, and it is, because a big part of listening is listening to what is not being said. Repeat back to other people what you've heard and seek clarification. So much of bad communication and fake news is basically not hearing and not listening attentively and not finding clarification at every level. And here's a big challenge for all of us: to actually wait until somebody else is finished speaking before we start. The most difficult component of listening is to wait for a period at the end of somebody's conversation to pause, to invite in the Holy Spirit before we make a response. To pause and pivot is what we've done for 2 years plus during COVID, and we're asked to do it even more in our own conversations. In the word search that I spoke of at the very beginning, I talked about encounter and sacred space and affirmation and the grace of letting go of our own agendas. Because ultimately, my friends, we are all pilgrims walking each other home, offering hope along that journey, hearing and holding the truth of other people, because their life is a burning bush for us. Everywhere there is holy ground, even in the most broken of places, because that is where God is most present with the marginalized, the vulnerable, and the broken, and the soiled. That is where the face of God is to be found. That is holy ground. We acknowledge the woman at the well, and we are grateful for the encounter of Christ as she stood in the truth of her own life. It was a moment of grace, and he validated her by his listening stance. He truly was life-giving. And it is from Christ himself, when they cast lots for his seamless garment, that we encounter the most sacred belief that we have, that all life is sacred, and that it is woven in the hand of God from the moment that we are created until the moment that we see him once again at the end of this sacred journey. My friends, let's be life-giving and affirming to one another. Amen.